Many Africans hail Zimbabwe's land reform as something that we should be proud of, and I think we should be proud of it. But I think there's something that we're missing in this conversation, and we need to have it now. To understand Zimbabwe's land reform policy, we need to go back to the late 1970s, where the Lancaster Agreement was signed that ushered in Zimbabwe from being Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. As part of that agreement, land reform was going to be based on a willing buyer, willing seller arrangement, aka free market economics, and the British government was going to give some compensation to help land redistribution. But from the start, that policy was doomed to fail for one major reason: free market economics. By that, farming was highly profitable in Zimbabwe in that cash crops like tobacco were creating huge profits for farmers, and no sane farmer would sell that plot of land just for land reform. It just didn't make economic and business sense to them. And there's research to back up before the 1990s land reform that there was very little land changing hands between white farmers to black farmers. Because of the slow pace of change, the demand for land reform grew louder and stronger, which culminated in the late 90s policy of driving off farmers to redistribute land from white farmers to black farmers. Immediately, that policy created a bitter feud between Zimbabwe and the UK. Even though that feud was there prior, it intensified it. And not shortly afterwards, the Western world was in a feud with Zimbabwe. In a very short time, Zimbabwe's agricultural sector died. And furthermore, because there was a lack of confidence in the Zimbabwean economy, other sectors began to die, causing an economic collapse in the whole country. By 2016, Zimbabwe had to declare a state of emergency for agriculture, simply meaning that Zimbabwe had to admit some defeat that this land reform policy had not worked. Though the land reform did have some positive impacts in terms of land being transferred from white people to black people, the economic impacts were massive and they were widespread across the economy. Though I think Zimbabwe's land reform policy was justified, we actually need to talk about this. From the 1960s, many African countries were realizing that they were entering into a neo-colonial world where economic power and strategy was the way that Africa was going to deal with the world. And now the struggle was not a struggle for physical freedom, but economic freedom. And I think Zimbabwe should have taken a path of using economics as a way of finding economic freedom. And what I mean by that is that if you take a look at the land reform policy, the things that Zimbabwe could have done is that could have put taxes on the farming class, could have put taxes on the profits that they made. I can give you the example of Australia, who put a super profit tax on the money sector because they were earning massive profits due to the prices of basic raw materials during that late 2000s. By having a tax on farms and farming profits, what Zimbabwe would have been doing is making farming on those land less profitable and making them more likely to be willing to sell off that land. And even if it didn't work in the short term, they'll be saving money to help farmers, especially young farmers who are skilled in farming, to be able to buy that land. If anything, Zimbabwe could have used that revenue that they could have gotten from the tax to buy land from those farmers, reserve it for young black farmers to take it on, maybe lease that land that they bought to young farmers to see if they're good at farming, and over time go from a lease arrangement to having those people owning the land. This is just one simple idea. There's many other ideas that could have explored to help land reform become a reality in a way that did not cause the economy to collapse. And there's a big factor that we need to think about here. This land reform policy could have emboldened other African nations to do the necessary reforms that they needed in their countries. For example, South Africa. Right now, South Africa is tossing up land reform, but it's so scared because many people look at Zimbabwe as a failed case study. But really, Zimbabwe's case study could have been more successful if we had employed economic thinking and strategy to do land reform. As Africans in a neo-colonial world, we need to shift our tactics from forceful tactics to economic strategic tactics that will help us outthink the competition rather than fight the competition. China is an example of a country that's used economic strategy to make that position go from being one of the poorest countries, even below Africa in the 1960s, to being one of the richest countries in the world. We can do the same as Africans. As Africans, we need to grow our knowledge of economics. And that's what this channel is all about. And hopefully you will subscribe down below.